Welcome, everyone, and you are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. On today's pod, we are joined by Professor Sal Mercogliano, PhD. Dr. Mercogliano holds a PhD from the University of Alabama in military and naval history. He is a former merchant mariner, teaches courses in maritime history, security, and policy. Dr. Mercogliano hosts his own YouTube channel called What's Going On with Shipping. The channel focuses on maritime industry policy, current events in the maritime sector, along with maritime history. As of last count, I checked, he had over 40,000 subscribers. I hope to get there half of that one day. It's all up to you. Well done. Dr. Mercogliano, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for coming on.
Chris, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I think we talked earlier. I can call you Sal because Dr. Mercogliano becomes a mouthful. So Sal, hopefully that's okay with you.
Sal's fine. It's what everybody calls me.
You're good. About yourself.
Classic New York kid. Grew up in New York City and out in Long Island. Went to a school out there. I got the shipping bug from my dad. My dad owned his own butcher shop, but had a boat. And so he used to love to go deep sea fishing. He used to go off 50, 100 miles off the South Shore of Long Island and go fishing. And I was the boat driver. That's what I got to do. I hated fishing. I can't eat fish. I just can't. But I love driving the boat. From a little kid, I just want to drive the boat. You go 100 miles off the coast of Long Island. It's Ambrose Channel right there. You head right out there and you see the ships coming in and out of New York Harbor all the time. And that's where my bug came from. So it's all I wanted to do was get on one of those ships and go somewhere. And that was it. Did it for 3 years sailing, then 4 years ashore working. So I worked the shore side and the afloat side. I was really interested in the history of it, the background of the industry. And I didn't find a lot about it, to tell you the truth. You know, you could find stuff about, days of sail and even back to maybe World War II, but not really the modern stuff. And that kind of really piqued my interest. And so I had an opportunity to go to grad school at East Carolina, went to Alabama, as you mentioned. Got my MA in maritime history and nautical archaeology, my PhD. And I've been really interested in that ever since. So I've been very fortunate to be able to teach the classes I do. I do a adjunct class for the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy on maritime industry policy, bring in master students into that program. So I get a lot of contact with people who are in the industry. And as you know, from our alumni with SUNY Maritime, we have a great alumni group. We're able to really converse. So, I feel like I got a really good pulse on the maritime industry. But at the same time, there's so many people who know nothing about the maritime industry. And that was really my kicker to get this started.
By this, you're referring to the YouTube channel. Walk through a little bit. What was, we talked before that we got how did you go from, teaching these classes and having this interest? And by the way, a couple of other parallels. My father was a butcher as well for a long time. Interestingly enough, at Macy's, when they actually had a butcher shop in the basement. So he was that. And I had a very similar start. A college fair night. We went to Maritime, and I'm like, this is what I want to do. That it was kind of like done and dusted right there. So I was very enthusiastic about it. But certainly, having a YouTube channel, how did you get to that point where you said, wow, there's a demand for this. This is interesting to me. Walk us through how you went from teaching classes and kind of having an interest in talking to people to actually having a channel and being as followed as it is.
COVID in 2020 threw everything off, and everybody who taught had to go online. And so that was a process for every teacher, professor around the world, all of a sudden, and everybody in general. The vice president for an organization, the North American Society for Oceanic History, we had to cancel that conference, but we had some great papers lined up. And so I started a YouTube channel so that these historians, and particularly the graduate students, could have an opportunity to present their papers and get them out there. So I got a little experience running a YouTube channel. It wasn't very big, wasn't very popular, but I did it. But I also started writing more on maritime industry policy, and particularly for GCaptain, which is run by John Conrad, a graduate of SUNY Maritime. And so about every month I was writing a piece for GCaptain. And when Ever Given went ashore in the Suez, the BBC contacted GCaptain and said, listen, we need some people who can talk about shipping, and who do you got? And John recommended me. It was a weird coincidence because it was the same day as John's daughter's birthday. So he couldn't go on the air because of his daughter's birthday. So I wound up going on the air on BBC, and that blew up. That was just, I did one hit for BBC World. And then the next 6 days were a blur for me because I was on so many different channels and doing things. And I think it was because I brought a unique kind of experience, former merchant mariner, but I also got the history side. I've got the policy side. So I had one producer tell me, you're three guests in one. You're great. You can answer these questions, field them. You got a good presence. You can talk. You can be concise. And I enjoyed it a lot. The problem with it going on any of those sites ever is it's very quick. It's anywhere from a minute to 5 minutes, and you don't have enough to say. So after my first day on BBC, I was like, I got so much more to say about Ever Given. So I just decided on my YouTube channel, which I just posted lectures and stuff like that, post, an analysis on Ever Given. And I did it with John Conrad and a few other people. We did it. And, the day before the Ever Given went ashore in the Suez, I had 300 subscribers and 3 views on my YouTube channel the day before. That day I posted my first Ever Given story. I had 3,000 views. And as you mentioned now, I got over 40,000 subscribers and 4.5 million views. So it just kind of took off. I think I found a little niche. You found a little niche on the internet where people were describing shipping, and there's some great people out there who do it. A lot of people hands-on experience side, but no one was really describing the big macro picture of shipping and putting it into context whereby everybody could understand it. And I think that's what I found
has happened is that you found that niche, and this isn't the only time that something like this has happened. We've had other ever groundings, and then with the container port issues happening on the West Coast, certainly that has had a demand from not only non-news people, but just everyday and people in their everyday lives wanting to know what happened. As you've gone through this experience in the last few years, what has kind of been a little different, or what has surprised you as you've gone through this using social media and getting your name out there, obviously getting the number of views and the number of subscribers, but is there anything else that you've kind of gone, wow, I didn't expect the journey to start this way? You talk a little bit about starting as a history channel, not the history channel, but a maritime history channel, and then pivoting. Talk a little bit about kind of what has happened versus what was expected.
Yeah, so I covered Ever Given, and Ever Given was a long, drawn-out affair because it wasn't just the 6 days in the Suez; it was the 100 days arrested in the Suez. So I kind of, after the big moment when she got freed, I kind of petered off on doing videos. I did a few more to do updates on it, but then I kind of petered off, and so did my subscribers. And if you looked at my views, they just kind of fell off. And then I had a subscriber who was one of the first ones on there, sat there and said, Sal, we're looking to you to explain a lot of this stuff, and you're not really providing it for us. He goes, and you got a great opportunity to do this. You should really think about talking more about the shipping industry in general. And I think that's a big thing, is listening to your subscribers, listening to the people who are listening to you. Is what do they want? As a teacher, I get feedback from students. Most teachers get at the end of their courses, give this, eval, and they get it at the end of the eval, and they go. I love to give an eval about 1/3 and 2/3 of the way through the class. Sit there and see what's working, what's not working. Because what I think is working in the classroom may not be working. And better yet, there may be something of interest to the students that I've only touched upon, but they want more. And so I adjusted. And if you look at my subscriptions, I had a big peak with Ever Given, but the biggest one was like in September of last year when everything hit the fan regarding the supply chain crisis. And I had one video that went viral, and there's nothing you could do to make a viral video. You have no control over it. You don't know what's going to do it. You never know. But I had one video where I talked about, it was the announcement of the government that the Port of LA and Long Beach was going 24/7. And I explained, no, that's not going to work for the following reasons. And I did a video on it. And very funnily, one of our classmates sent me a note, said, oh, that's a terrible video. You shouldn't post that. That's not a good video. And it got over 500,000 views. It's my most popular video I've ever done. It is the most money I've ever made for 15 minutes sitting on my butt talking to a camera in my life, because I was able to monetize it through YouTube. Just showed me, okay, this is what I got to follow the news. I got to see what's interesting in the news. And I could still do the stories I want to do, but I got to intermix them with what people want to see. So, if there's a disaster in the world, if there's Everforward in the Chesapeake, if it's the Express Pearl, if it's a great video of a container ship, and by great, I mean it's exciting video. It's not a great video for people on board. But if you got a video of a container ship sliding into Taiwanese ports, knocking down a crane, man, people want to understand that. It's like, well, how the hell that happen? And you just take a few minutes, and, you and me, it's nothing to sit there and explain why this happens. But for a lot of people, it's like, they don't understand. They don't understand how the ships work. They don't understand the mechanics of it. They don't understand the dynamics of how ships operate. And you take 10 to 20 minutes, break it down, give a little context. I, as a historian, I always give source material. This is where I'm getting my information from. Go check on me. Don't take what I'm saying for gospel. Go follow this. Then you become a source for other people. and they want to contact you. So when Everforward went ashore in Chesapeake, I was contacted to go on news channels and talk about it. A good friend of mine says, you're the face of maritime disasters now, which is ironically what one of my professors said.
Well, I don't think. I think maybe they were referring to something else, but that's kind of funny.
I think it's positive.
I think it's very positive.
It's a positive.
It stuck with you for all that time, Sal. That's excellent.
But the other thing too is the other problem I've had for a long time is when the news looks at the maritime industry, it's a disaster. It's always a disaster. It's Costa Concordia, it's Exxon Valdez. It's always a disaster. And my problem is those are the moments when you can grab people and give them some context and explain to them what is happening. And it always drove me crazy because these events would happen and no one would get out there and talk about it. Maersk, Alabama, it was a great example of that. We could have been talking about the issues of shipping, cargo preference, of food aid. A lot of things could have been talked about. But instead, there's nobody out there but the people who want to talk about the negative. And one of the biggest problems, I think, in social media right now, Chris, is people are filling social media with the negative, and that becomes the news source that people go to. If people are bashing the Jones Act, if they're bashing the U.S. maritime industry, if they're bashing everything, those are the sources that are out there that people do. They do what everyone does, what they do, what my students do. They do a Google search, and if the first thing that comes up is this, that's what they're going to go look at. And the only way really to counter that in many ways is to get content out there. But not just any content, but good content that leads to other sources.
Well, I think that's, that was going to be my follow-on question, is that we kind of suffer from this. It's a feast of famine almost. It's a feast of terrible news. And then everybody forgets about it and doesn't realize that the 99% of the other time or higher, it just goes along without a hitch, and things happen, from time to time. And unfortunately, like you said, this crane disasters or some other things happening become more prevalent. You pointed out something else, is listening to your people. And it sounds like some of the feedback that you got, of course, talks about seeing some of the positive things there. Talk about some of the positive things that you explained on your YouTube channel and some of the reaction to more of the positive stories that you have.
Well, the most positive one I could tell you, it's very easy for me to identify this, is the issues that came up with sexual assault, sexual harassment in the maritime industry. I mean, that was a big one. Early on, I got stories about issues going on at the Merchant Marine Academy and other areas of the industry. And I put a video out there very early about this. And man, I got slammed by some of the alumni from some institutions and some other areas. But then the report came out about what was happening at these institutions. I didn't back down on it. I'm lucky. I'm a tenured professor. You can't fire me unless I do something really wrong at the university. So I'm pretty good, So I'm in a nice, comfortable position. And I'm also not in the maritime industry. So I'm not working for a company. I'm not working for a union. I'm not working for a shipyard. I can look at things and pretty objectively, in my opinion, say things and do it. And my thing I did about sexual assault, sexual harassment, and we built on that as the report came in. And I'm not trying to bash anybody. I was just trying to say there's an issue in the industry about this. It got to the point where I got a call from the Assistant Secretary of Transportation for my opinion on this. And, it's one level below Buttigieg. And I got to talk to her and the acting maritime administrator about an issue. And I said, listen, I've talked to people in the industry. I can tell you what's going on in the industry. And this is the problem you have. And I laid it out. Boom, boom, boom. And I was told by one of the people who were in that group, not those two, but somebody else who was in that group, that I was wrong. I said, no, you go check the records. You tell me how many people have been charged or prosecuted for sexual harassment, sexual assault over the past 10 years. They came back and said, well, yeah, it's only been 2. It's like, well, yeah, that's your problem then, because you can't tell me over 10 years that there's only been 2 sexual assault, 2 sexual harassment. There's an issue with the ability to report and to prosecute. To me, that was amazing. That was, why are they calling me? I'm a YouTuber. I'm a college professor, and I joke with my students all the time. Is I talk to 30 of them in a classroom at a time, and they're bored out of their mind. I said, I could post a video right now, and I'll get 10,000 views. So it's not the material. It's you guys. You guys got to get a little bit more excited about this. But you got to be also careful with it. You got to be careful about what you say and what you do. because, at the same time, I've had people come back to me. It's like, Sal, you can't say that. You're an influencer. People are watching you, and what you say matters. You can't just do it. I had one video one time, and I was joking around. I said something about Massachusetts Maritime. Now, going to New York Maritime, we play fun with all the maritime institutions. And I said something about Mass Maritime. I probably shouldn't have said. And I had somebody come back. It's like, you can't say that. It's like people will actually believe that that's true of it. So I had to go back in and edit the video. And it was nothing bad. I was just playing around with them. I was saying, the best versus the worst schools. And so it was a good joke. And we were just playing around, because I played around with guys. I know people at Mass all the time, and it's always fun. But you realize, okay, I got to take this a little bit more seriously than I do, because people are watching it. People are saying, I did a video on the Port of LA and Long Beach, where I talked about the fact that the port envoy, John Picari, was going, basically endorsing this idea of this extra demurrage fee on containers coming in, the $100 extra after 9 days. I called it hyper-demurrage. I came up with this term called hyper-demurrage. I said, this is hyper-demurrage. I said, it's a real big problem because the FMC is against excessive demurrage, but at the same time, the port envoy for the White House is saying it's great. And I ran a couple of videos, said that, and I got a call from somebody who says, the administration doesn't like you saying that. I was like, the administration? I said, who are you talking about? He said, really, seriously, they don't like you talking about this. And I still say it. I didn't change it. But it was like, okay, you got to realize that after a while, and it doesn't matter the number of views you have. Let me be clear. It doesn't matter if you have 43,000 subscribers or 4 subscribers. When you put something out onto social media, the internet, whatever you want to call it, it's out there, and people will view it and they will take it seriously. And, you got to be very careful not to, I don't want to say offend, because sometimes you have to say the way things are, and whether people take it the wrong way or not. It's not, I had a lot of people, when Ever Given went ashore in the Suez, tell me that the ship was loaded with nuclear weapons, weather-changing devices, and little kids in containers. And I had to deal with that because there's a conspiracy about that. And, I as politely as I could said, no, there's no evidence, no proof of that. Keep moving right along. And at the same time, you have to deal with it. You can't just let it sit there, because if you let it sit there, then people tend to think it's the truth, especially if you don't respond.
And what you're doing is actually pretty positive, because it's getting a lot of issues to people who need to make changes, or at least adjustment to those issues. And sometimes, and this is not just indicative of the government. I mean, it's easy to pick on the government, right? Because it's this institution, but there are people behind it. And I think for the most part, regardless of party, not getting too political, they want to do the right thing, right? They want to make sure that things work and things move along. But certainly this gives our industry a voice that you don't need access to be friends with the Assistant Secretary of Transportation. You have a voice, a positive voice for the industry. You're not saying anything too outlandish, but you're pointing out some things that they don't want to hear, which in fact are things that are truisms. So I think that that's a very positive from social media. Pivoting a little bit and given your unique background in being a mariner, going to one of the maritime schools, and now teaching, looking at the lens of the maritime schools, what do you think, what tools, whether it's social media skills, digital platforms, or what have you, do we need to be equipping our future mariners and people who are going to be in the industry? And even from your university, if they're going to be on the industry on an advisory role, maybe not necessarily sailing, but there's an interest there in what the maritime industry does, and maybe some of those your students actually get in. What should we be equipping our future industry participants?
Well, I think everybody needs to literally take a class. They're going to college on social media. I really do, because it is the lens in which a lot of information gets out there to people. I mean, I really do. I believe it. It's people will Google everything they need. It's so different than you and I went to school. I start every class I ever have with a piece of music. I always start every class with music. There's music playing in the background. I don't bring any DVDs or CDs with me to class. I just pull it up on YouTube. I can find every piece of music in the world on YouTube and play it. And that means information is available right at your fingertips. I think the companies in particularly need to have a social media policy. They need to be out there. And I think it's a big detriment to them that they're not out there. They've been terrified of news for a long time, shipping companies. In the midst of Ever Given, you could not get the shipping companies to come out and say anything. I wanted to talk about Maersk, for example. Right behind Ever Given was Maersk Denver. And Maersk Denver was the ship just astern of Ever Given. And that ship had to come to a crash stop in the middle of the Suez to prevent from either going aground or T-boning Ever Given right in the middle of the Suez. You know as well as I do, that's an amazing maneuver. To stop in less than a mile in a canal, going about 12 knots without hitting the bank was a pretty impressive piece of maneuvering, I would argue. And I told Maersk, I want to talk about that. That's great. Let's have a good positive story here. Didn't want to touch it. Did not want their name associated with Ever Given. They just didn't want it. I got repeatedly told by them they didn't want it. I said, this is a great story. This is American seamanship. It's great. It highlights, what good mariners can do and play a big positive role here. And then at the same time, they kind of squashed their mariners that were on there from social media. Don't put anything out there. Don't put anything out there at all. And I think, one of the things that attracts people to jobs today is following people in those professions, watching them, seeing what they do and doing it well. If you follow Chief McCoy, for example, he's fantastic. I mean, he's got 300,000 followers. He's talking about what it's like to be a chief engineer. Brian Boyle, second mate, he does a great job, kind of doing that. And I think people need to realize that there are positive things that you can do. Madeline Walchko right now on board the President Wilson, stuck in the shipyard in Shanghai with her series Restricted to Ship. Great example of that, where you're seeing how you can use social media to portray an industry, talk about it. And even though she's talking about being trapped in Shanghai, I think a lot of people would see that and say, I'm interested in that job. That sounds really interesting. It's something I don't want to be stuck in Shanghai, but I really am interested in that. You can't keep it bottled up. You just can't. And so the best thing you can do is be as positive as you can and be out there. One of the worst things you can do is not talk. Because if you don't talk, somebody else is going to talk. And then that becomes the narrative, and they hijack the narrative from you. And then you find out that you're behind the power.
That's an interesting observation. And I run it parallel to something that happened to me when I was sailing. Nothing bad when I was sailing for Mobil. I actually was way ahead of the curve in the mid 90s, and I bought a laptop computer, and I actually brought it on board the ship with me. I ended up doing all of the safety reports for the captain. He's like, here, you have a computer, figure it out. And this is, again, way, mid 90s. It wasn't commonplace. It cost a lot. It was also super heavy. And the point being is that actually being progressive led to the captain, when we were doing ISO ISM, getting that program in place. The captain was asked who on board can come ashore and help us with that program. They're like, well, Chris is computer literate. He writes all these reports. He gets it anyway. Go ashore. And that's how I ended up transitioning. It was through being a little progressive. And I think that that's the same idea. What you're saying is that teach these sort of skill sets, and they're, maybe soft, or maybe they need to be codified in the class, but certainly to do that and to teach that and to show people that this is the way forward. And I think that that's a very good point.
Yeah, I would also add that, the maritime colleges and universities need to do a better job of emphasizing what they do in some ways. I think, those should be institutions that aren't just geared to training future mariners. They should be educating people on the maritime industry. And I'm really hard on them for not doing more, seeing them out there more and promoting all aspects of the industry, and especially doing some knowledge-based education of politicians, of influencers, of people like that. I did a summer seminar one year up at the U.S. Military Academy where they taught you how to teach military history. Why are we not teaching people about the maritime industry? Why are we not hosting, congressional delegations and local politicians in? It's like, this is what the maritime industry does. This is what we do. This is the history of it. Here's where it is today. These are the issues going into the future. Boom, off you go. And I think, especially because we have such a great network of maritime colleges, universities, and schools around the country. We cover the bases. We're all over the place. And yet, I think that alliance of them together would be a very potent force to promote it along with the maritime.
I agree. And I think that there is that opportunity to kind of, even if to do snippets of, hi, I'm the second officer on, the Mass Maritime school ship, the Kennedy, I think it is. And, we're here in Philadelphia, and talk about these things and kind of make it really very accessible, not only to promote future students, which is their job one, but then, like you said, to give an overall lift to the to the industry, because I do think that although, good persons like yourself and others who are putting this really great content out there, there needs to be more, and it needs to be more accessible. As we start to wrap up, I always like to ask the following question, and I'm going to ask you a slightly different question, given kind of who you are in terms of your PhD and being a tenured professor. So I usually ask what book you're reading. So I'll ask that. But are you writing anything, whether it's a book or long form? Because I know that that's something that a lot of professors end up doing.
Yeah. So reading wise, I've been reading, I read quite a bit. So I think I'm a terrible example about that. It depends on what day you catch me on what I'm reading. One of the books that I've just finished reading, which is a great one, is Bruce Jones's To Rule the Seas, which is a great book, which talks about the intersection of commercial and military in the modern day. I think it's a great one. Bruce Jones from Brookings Institute, just a great writer, and really talks about the commercial and military aspects post-Cold War. And, what role does commercial shipping, does military shipping play? I think it's a great general audience book, and even for professionals to be reading. I think it's a really good one to look at. Myself, I'm writing a book right now on the intersection of commercial and military shipping in World War I. And this is looking at the transportation of the American Expeditionary Force over to Europe and the issues associated with that, and what basically will result in the creation of America's first national maritime strategy, the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, what becomes known as the Jones Act. I take a much different view than a lot of people on the Jones Act. It's not just cabotage, Section 27. It was an entire maritime strategy that was created. It was international shipping. It was shipbuilding. It was training. It was mariners' rights. It was funding for shipbuilding. It created the U.S. Shipping Board, or it institutionalized the U.S. Shipping Board. And the U.S. comes out of World War I, second largest merchant marine in the world, challenging the British. And, we really put ourselves out there on the world scale, on the world scene, and challenged the British for maritime supremacy. And it put us into position so that when World War II happened, we were able to transport the arsenal of democracy, from the ports to, from the home front to the battlefront. And, that's what I'm kind of looking at right now, is that precursor to the success of World War II. I want to write a book on the Merchant Marine in World War II. I want to write a book on military sea lift. I just got to get the time.
Well, we're going to wish you best of luck and look forward to reading that when it comes out. Of course, let me know. We'll push it on the podcast page and all that good stuff. So that kind of gets us wrapped up here. And I do appreciate you coming on, Sal. Thank you very much. All the success in your channel, and we'll be tuning in and look for the podcast. I'll include a link to your channel. So thanks again for coming on, Professor. I do appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
That was Professor Sal Mercogliano, who shed some great light on the maritime industry, and in particular, how social media can and should be used. We also got to learn his nickname and what he thinks the maritime schools, as well as all colleges, should be teaching their students. I hope that you found the podcast informative and subscribe to it on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, and most other places that you get your podcast. The pod is also now on YouTube. And don't forget to like us, subscribe, follow, tell your friends. Thanks again. I'm your host, Chris Aversano, wishing you fair winds and following seas.